Tonight we're venturing deep into a world carved by rugged mountains, endless fjords, and relentless winters. A world where survival was never guaranteed, and every day was a test of strength, faith, and community. Imagine a land where the roar of the sea was both a lifeline and a threat, where ancient gods whispered in the shadows even as new faith took hold, and where every family's fate was woven tightly into the harsh rhythm of the seasons. This is medieval Norway, a kingdom of breathtaking beauty and brutal hardship, where the ordinary and the extraordinary collided. It's a story of fierce warriors turned kings, humble farmers battling the cold earth, and women whose quiet courage held whole communities together. A story not just of battles and kings, but of everyday people living lives as raw and real as the wild landscape around them. Tonight, you won't just learn history, you'll feel the chill of winter nights, hear the crackling fires in wooden stave churches, and sense the steady pulse of a people shaped by nature's unforgiving hand. This is a journey into resilience, faith, and identity forged in fjords and forests. So settle in, breathe in the crisp northern air, and walk with me through a Norway few have truly seen. A world where every moment mattered and where only the strong, the clever, and the brave could endure. Stay close, because once we step into this world, there's no turning back. From Vikings to kingdom, the transformation of Norway. Imagine a world carved from jagged fjords, endless forests, and cold seas, where once fierce Viking raiders ruled the waves, striking fear into distant shores. But now, that world is shifting beneath the weight of new beliefs and new rulers. The wild, chaotic days of pillage are fading, replaced by a fragile peace crafted by kings whose power stretches beyond clans and coastal villages. In this time, the old gods slowly recede as the Christian cross takes root. The distant church's influence seeps into every valley and village, intertwining faith with power. Kings no longer just wield swords, they wield the sacred authority granted by bishops and priests. The ancient loyalties to family and local chieftains begin to bend under the pull of a centralized crown, a slow but steady forging of a kingdom out of fragmented tribes. The rugged land, with its mountains slicing the horizon and its deep fjords hiding isolated farms, is no easy place to rule. Local leaders fiercely guard their autonomy, their traditions etched into the rocky soil and whispered through generations. Yet the king's court in the growing town becomes a beacon of order and law, drawing nobles, merchants, and clergy alike to the heart of a changing Norway. Across the countryside, wooden stave churches rise like sentinels, simple yet striking, their carved dragon heads nodding to the past, even as their crosses proclaim a new age. These churches are more than places of worship. They are symbols of the kingdom's evolving identity, where old myths meet new faith, and where loyalty to God is inseparable from loyalty to the crown. Life for the common folk is harsh and unyielding. Farmers battle rocky fields and short summers, fishermen brave stormy seas, and craftspeople shape wood and iron by flickering torchlight. Every day demands resilience, every season offers new challenges. Social lines are clear. Lords and kings enjoy privileges earned through birth and battle, while peasants toil in service and struggle for survival. Yet in the towns, something different begins to stir. Once mere waypoints for Viking ships, these harbors grow into bustling centers of trade and craft. Merchants from distant lands arrive with goods and news, weaving Norway into a web of commerce that reaches beyond the northern skies. The Viking, once a raider, becomes a trader and settler, carrying not just weapons, but ideas and wealth. This transformation is not sudden nor complete. Shadows of the old ways linger, and conflicts flare as the new kingdom fights for its place in a changing world. But through it all, a new Norwegian identity emerges, rooted in fierce independence, shaped by faith and law, and bound by the rising power of kings who dare to dream of unity across fjord and forest. To live in this kingdom is to stand at the crossroads of past and future, where every breath carries the weight of history and hope. It is a world where the cold sea wind stings the face, the call of church bells echoes across valleys, and the fierce spirit of the Vikings whispers through the trees, forever part of the land and its people. The rise of Bergen, Norway's urban heart. Step into the bustling streets of Bergen, where the scent of the sea and the tang of dried fish fill the air, weaving with the sharp aroma of tar from the shipyards. This is no quiet fishing village, but a growing heartbeat of Norway's medieval world. A place where wooden houses lean precariously against each other, their weathered facades telling stories of storms weathered and fortunes made. The harbor thrums with life, a chaotic symphony of sailors shouting orders, merchants bargaining fiercely in foreign tongues, and the steady clatter of hooves against cobblestones. German traders from far-off Hanseatic cities mingle with local fishermen, their voices rising above the cry of gulls and the slap of waves against hulls. Here, exotic goods arrive, spices, cloth, metals, and the promise of prosperity swells with every new ship that docks. As you wander narrow alleys lined with timber-framed homes, you notice the sharp contrast between the wealthy merchants' shops filled with fine goods and the cramped quarters of the dock workers and fishermen who fuel the town's lifeblood. The wooden planks beneath your feet creak with age, worn by the countless steps of people rushing to trade, to pray in the nearby stave church, or to simply survive the chill that clings to the sea breeze. At the fish market, the loud bargaining is almost a ritual. Salted cod, the lifeblood of Norway's economy, lies in mounds glistening under the gray sky. This fish is more than food. It is currency, sustenance, and the reason Bergen thrives. The smell is pungent but strangely comforting, a reminder of the sea's generosity and cruelty alike. Life here is hard. Winters bite deep and the damp seeps into bones. The wealth of the town's elite contrasts sharply with the daily struggle of the poor, yet all are bound by the pulse of commerce. The market is a place where news travels faster than the north wind, and every face reflects a story of hope, fear, and unyielding determination. Beyond trade, Bergen is a melting pot of culture and power. The church's wooden spires rise above the rooftops, signaling the kingdom's new faith and the growing influence of clergy who wield both spiritual and political authority. The royal presence is felt too, as the king's envoys pass through, reminding everyone that this bustling hub is also a jewel in the crown of a kingdom striving for unity and strength. To live in Bergen during these times is to embrace a life of constant motion, where fortunes are made and lost on the turn of a tide, where every alley holds a secret, and where the sea's relentless rhythm shapes the fate of those brave enough to call this place home. Here, amid the salt and timber, the echoes of a Viking past linger quietly beneath the growing pulse of medieval ambition. Bergen is not just a town, it is the heart of a kingdom, beating strong against the wild northern night. Life among the fjords, rural Norway's rugged rhythms. Picture a land carved by ice and time. Steep mountains plunging into deep, cold fjords, where narrow strips of fertile soil cling desperately to rocky slopes. Here life moves to the steady, harsh rhythm of nature, unyielding and often unforgiving. This is rural Norway, far from the bustling ports and royal courts, where peasants carve their existence from stone and sea. In these isolated valleys, survival is a daily battle. The seasons govern every action, from the first thaw that calls for planting hardy grains in stubborn soil to the harsh winters that drive families close to the fire. Fields are small and precious, shared among kin who depend on one another to till the land, harvest crops, and store enough food to outlast the long, dark months. Fishing, too, is vital, a lifeline tethered to the ever-changing moods of the sea. Small wooden boats slip quietly from hidden coves at dawn, their crews seasoned by years of weathering sudden storms and biting cold. Nets are cast with practiced skill, and the catch, cod, herring, and other cold water fish, is dried or salted to sustain the community through times when the fjords freeze or storms rage. Homes are humble, built of timber and stone, clustered in hamlets where everyone knows each other's names and stories. Walls are thick to hold back the cold, and hearth fires burn low but constant, their smoke curling through chimneys into the gray sky. Each room tells a story of endurance, a place where generations huddle together, sharing food, warmth, and tales beneath a roof that is both refuge and fortress. The natural world here is both ally and adversary. Avalanches roar down mountainsides, sudden floods reshape riverbanks, and biting winds howl through narrow passes. Yet the land provides wild berries, herbs, and game, gifts that villagers gather with care and gratitude. Every stone, every tree, every ripple on the water carries meaning, shaping a worldview rooted in respect and survival. Community bonds are the threads that hold these lives together. Neighbors help each other build barns, harvest crops, and tend to the sick. Old traditions persist in shared rituals, festivals marking the solstice, church gatherings on Sundays, and stories passed down that blend pagan echoes with the growing Christian faith. But life here is far from easy. Hunger is a constant threat, and a poor harvest can mean months of hardship. Illness spreads quickly in close quarters, and help from distant towns or the crown's representatives is rare, slow, and uncertain. In this rugged frontier, resilience is not just a virtue, it is a necessity. To live among the fjords is to understand the delicate balance between human will and the overwhelming power of nature. It is to wake each day knowing that survival depends on skill, community, and a stubborn hope that the sun will shine again and the fields will yield once more. Here, in the quiet valleys and rugged coasts, the soul of medieval Norway beats steady and strong, shaped by fjords and forests, by wind and wave, by people whose lives are woven tightly with the land itself. Lords of the land and law, nobility, and royal authority. Imagine a world where power is not just held by kings, but wrestled over in the halls and farms of rugged Norway's nobility, the Lendmen, men who claimed vast estates and commanded fierce loyalty. These lords of the land ruled with a mix of ancient tradition and emerging royal decree, their authority born from bloodlines, alliances, and sheer force. In the winding valleys and scattered settlements, Lendmen stood as the crown's local pillars, but also as proud power brokers wary of any monarch's attempt to impose order too rigidly. Their wealth came from land, vast tracts where peasants toiled, fishing rights stretched along fjords, and forests offered timber and game. Each estate was a small kingdom, with the Lendmen dispensing justice, collecting taxes, and raising men for war when the call came. But this was a time of change. Norway's kings sought to centralize power, to bring law and order beyond local customs that varied from fjord to valley. Royal officials, judges, and sheriffs began to appear, their presence a reminder that the crown's shadow stretched further each year. Laws were codified and recorded, moving away from the oral traditions and local assemblies, where disputes were settled by consensus or force. This shift was not without conflict. The Lendmen saw their age-old privileges challenged by royal edicts, and many resisted efforts to curb their autonomy. They clung to their rights to hold courts, collect tolls, and muster armies, even as the crown pressed for uniformity. At times, this tension erupted into open rebellion or subtle intrigues within the kingdom's great halls. Yet, the nobles also understood the benefits of a stronger monarchy. A centralized authority could bring stability to a realm long fragmented by geography and clan rivalries. The crown's growing legal system promised protection for merchants, uniform taxation, and a means to quell feuds that had too often spilled into violence. For some Lendmen, loyalty to the king was a strategic choice, a path to prestige and lasting legacy. Royal law itself was a blend, rooted in Christian principles and influenced by Scandinavian tradition. It sought to regulate land disputes, inheritance, and crime with clearer standards than the patchwork of local customs. But the enforcement of these laws depended on the cooperation of local lords, who held the real power on the ground. In this world, the common folk lived under layered authorities. Their immediate lord, the local assembly, the ting, the church, and the distant crown. Navigating these overlapping powers was a daily challenge, with justice often unpredictable and heavily influenced by status and connections. The interplay between nobility and monarchy shaped much of Norway's medieval political landscape. It was a delicate dance of power, where kings courted loyalty with gifts and marriages, and nobles balanced ambition with the need for order. The very identity of the kingdom was forged in these tensions, between old freedoms and new rules, between rugged independence and emerging unity. To live in this age of shifting power was to understand that law was both shield and sword. It could protect the weak or reinforce the strong, and those who wielded it best shaped the kingdom's future. Here, among fjords and fortresses, the story of Norway's nobility is not just about privilege but survival, an ongoing struggle to define what it meant to rule, to obey, and ultimately to belong. The wooden cathedrals, staved churches, sacred architecture, and faith. Amidst the wild beauty of Norway's fjords and mountains, something extraordinary took root during the High Medieval period, an architectural tradition that would become one of the nation's most iconic symbols, the stave church. These wooden cathedrals, standing tall and proud amid dense forests and rocky landscapes, were not merely places of worship. They were expressions of identity, craftsmanship, and faith that spoke to a people caught between the lingering shadows of their pagan past and the rising light of Christianity. The very word stave refers to the vertical wooden posts, or staves, that form the structural spine of these churches. Unlike the stone cathedrals rising across the rest of Europe, Norway's builders turned to their most abundant resource, wood. Master carpenters crafted intricate frameworks from enormous pine and fir logs, carefully joined without nails, using wooden pegs and sophisticated joinery techniques passed down through generations. This mastery was born out of necessity, skill, and a profound respect for the living forests that surrounded them. Approaching a stave church, one is struck by its soaring verticality and the intricate patterns etched into its wooden surfaces. The roofs often rise in tiered layers, adorned with dragon heads curling from their gables, an echo of Norse myth and legend, where dragons and serpents symbolize both protection and danger. These fierce carvings were believed to ward off evil spirits, blending ancient pagan symbolism with Christian purpose. Inside, the air smells faintly of pine resin and smoke from oil lamps, flickering softly in the dim light. The walls are lined with panels carved with biblical scenes and knotwork designs, reflecting a fascinating cultural blend. Though Christianity was now the official religion, the old beliefs did not vanish overnight. Instead, they coexisted, intertwined in art and ritual, creating a spiritual atmosphere unique to this land. The stave church was more than a building. It was the beating heart of rural medieval Norwegian life. For many, the church was the only communal structure for miles, a place for worship, gatherings, legal assemblies, and festivals. Here, villagers found respite from the relentless demands of farming and fishing, a chance to connect with neighbors and celebrate shared traditions. The process of building a stave church was itself a community endeavor. Entire villages came together, donating time, labor, and materials. Carpenters, often among the most respected members of society, worked meticulously for months or years, shaping every timber with hand tools. The logistics were formidable. Trees had to be felled carefully to produce straight, strong logs, complex foundations set into rocky soil, roofs constructed to shed heavy snow and rain. Moreover, these churches were symbols of royal authority and the Christianization of Norway. Kings such as Magnus Erlingsson actively promoted church construction, aligning their rule with the church to centralize power and unify the kingdom. The stave churches, with their blend of old and new, physically embodied this transition, ancient wood bearing new faith. Pilgrimages to these churches were common, and the interiors often housed relics, altars, and sacred objects. The clergy who served here were not only spiritual guides but key figures in local governance. Their presence reinforced the growing influence of the church in everyday life, offering education and literacy in a largely oral culture. Yet life around these churches was far from easy. The harsh Norwegian climate tested every structure and soul. Winters were long and brutal, threatening crops and isolating communities. The stave church's design reflected this reality: steep roofs to prevent snow buildup, sturdy walls to hold heat, and thick timber to resist fierce winds. Maintaining the churches required constant care. Each generation repaired, rebuilt, and sometimes expanded these wooden cathedrals, ensuring their survival for centuries. The spiritual rituals within these walls echoed the struggles and hopes of medieval Norwegians. Baptisms marked new life amid uncertain times. Weddings joined families and forged alliances. Funerals honored ancestors whose memory was as vital as the gods once worshipped. The church was a place where faith provided meaning in the face of hardship, where prayers were whispered against the roar of the wilderness outside. Even as Christianity reshaped Norway, the stave churches preserved a connection to the past. Their carvings and construction techniques recalled the Viking shipbuilding traditions, while their symbolism kept alive the ancient tales of gods, giants, and heroes. This layered identity made the stave churches uniquely Norwegian, rooted in place, yet reaching toward the heavens. Today, surviving stave churches stand as testaments to this remarkable era. They invite us to imagine a world where faith, art, and nature fuse to create something both fragile and enduring. To live in the high medieval kingdom of Norway was to exist in a delicate balance between the wild and the sacred, the old and the new, the human and the divine. The wooden cathedrals were more than shelters. They were the soul of a people navigating the tides of change. The medieval farmer's year, seasons of survival. In the high medieval kingdom of Norway, time did not simply pass. It marched in a relentless rhythm dictated by nature's harsh hand. For the medieval farmer, life was a constant negotiation with the seasons, a never-ending cycle of toil, hope, and preparation, where the bounty of one season could mean the difference between survival and starvation in the next. To live as a farmer in this rugged land was to live under the strict rule of the earth and sky, where every moment was shaped by weather, terrain, and the traditions passed down through generations. The year began with the thaw. After months of relentless cold and snow, the arrival of spring was a bittersweet promise. The snow melted from the fields and the fjords whispered with the melting ice, but the soil remained cold and reluctant to yield its gifts. The medieval farmer's first task was to prepare the land for planting, a laborious and often frustrating endeavor. Stone-filled soil had to be cleared. The sharp edges of glacial rock littered the fields, and every boulder removed was a small victory. Wooden plows, pulled by oxen or sturdy horses, turned the earth, though not deeply, as the rocky Norwegian soil allowed only shallow furrows. The soil's thinness limited crops, making every seed sown a precious gamble. Spring was also a time of hope and ritual. Farmers, knowing the precariousness of their work, sought blessings from the local priest or made offerings at the nearby stave church. The church bell's deep toll mingled with the sounds of birds returning from their winter migrations, creating a fragile harmony between sacred faith and the natural world. These moments reinforced the delicate balance upon which life depended, as if to remind every hand that planting was not merely physical labor, but an act of trust in the unseen forces that governed harvest and fate. The crops chosen reflected this cautiousness. Barley and oats, hardy and quick to mature, were the staples. Wheat struggled in the cooler climes and was grown only in the southernmost regions. Vegetables were limited. Root crops like turnips and cabbage could survive the cold, but the growing season was too short for most others. The farmer's family garden provided some variety, but overall, the fields were a study in resilience, an adaptation to the ruggedness of the land. Summer brought a brief explosion of life and activity. As the days stretched long and bright under the midnight sun, every moment was seized. Haymaking was the centerpiece of this season's labor, a painstaking process essential to surviving the long winters. The farmer and his family cut grass by hand with scythes, carefully drying and stacking it to feed livestock when the snow covered pastures. The meadows, often perched precariously on steep slopes or nestled in narrow valleys, required skill and care. A misstep could mean injury or lost hay, and both carried grave consequences. The livestock itself was a constant concern. Sheep, goats, cows, and a few hardy horses were vital for meat, milk, wool, and transport. Tending to them was a daily task. The animals grazed in communal pastures, watched over by shepherds or older children. Livestock was not just property, it was insurance, a buffer against famine, a source of wealth, and often a social marker. The farmer's fortunes rose and fell with the health of his animals as much as his crops. Community was intertwined with these rhythms. Summer was a time for gatherings and festivals, moments when the laborious pace eased and neighbors came together to share stories, food, and song. These celebrations often coincided with religious feast days, linking the agricultural calendar to the Christian liturgical year. At midsummer, bonfires blazed on hilltops, an ancient tradition mingling Old Norse customs with new Christian meaning. Such events provided relief from isolation and forged bonds essential for mutual aid in harsh times. As summer waned, the farmers focused on harvest. This was a season of both Jonshin. Bringing in the grain before the autumn rains could rot the crop was crucial. Families worked from dawn to dusk, reaping with sickles, binding sheaves, and stacking them into stooks to dry. The smell of fresh-cut grain, mingled with the earthy scent of tilled soil, was a fleeting perfume of hope. The harvest was a collective effort. Neighbors helped one another, knowing that any shortfall in one household threatened the whole community. With harvest safely gathered, attention turned to winter preparations. Woodcutting became a priority. Forests nearby were sources not only of timber for building and repairs, but also of fuel for cooking and warmth. The chopping, splitting, and stacking of firewood was a labor-intensive but vital task. In the cramped wooden longhouses, families began to store dried meat, salted fish, and preserved vegetables, food carefully prepared to last through the cold months when fresh produce was scarce or non-existent. Winter in medieval Norway was a season of survival unlike any other. The landscape transformed into a silent, frozen expanse. Deep snow blanketed the valleys, and icy winds whipped through the mountain passes. For the farmer, this was a time to conserve energy, mend tools, repair buildings, and tell stories by the hearth's fire. The longhouse was the nucleus of life during these months, a cramped but warm refuge where multiple generations huddled together. The social fabric also changed. Winter nights were filled with tales of ancestors, legends of trolls and spirits lurking in the forest, and prayers for protection against illness and misfortune. The community's ties were tested as travel became difficult and food scarce. Any misstep, illness, livestock death, or poor planning could spiral into tragedy. Throughout this harsh cycle, the farmer's life was marked by a profound respect for the forces beyond his control. The weather was the ultimate arbiter. Too much rain in spring could delay planting. An early frost could kill tender shoots. Drought could wither the crop. Every year was a gamble, a fragile dance between human effort and natural whimsy. This unpredictability shaped a culture of resilience and ingenuity. Farmers learned to read the skies, to store surplus carefully, and to rely on neighbors in times of need. The medieval Norwegian farmer's year was not just a measure of time, it was a testament to endurance. It was a story of lives tightly woven with the land, of communities bound by shared hardship and faith, and of traditions that sustained hope in the face of relentless challenge. To understand this rhythm is to glimpse the soul of a people who survived not because the land was easy, but because they refused to surrender to its severity. Women of the fjords, strength and survival. In the shadowed fjords and rugged valleys of medieval Norway, the lives of women were woven deeply into the fabric of survival and community. Unlike many parts of medieval Europe, where women's roles were often tightly constrained, Norwegian women held a unique position, one marked by strength, responsibility, and an intriguing balance of legal rights and social expectations. To live as a woman in this land was to navigate a world demanding resilience, intelligence, and a fierce independence born from the demands of the environment and culture. From the moment of birth, girls in medieval Norway were valued members of their families, not merely for their roles as future wives and mothers, but as active participants in the household economy. The harsh climate and isolated settlements meant that every hand counted. From a young age, girls learned the rhythms of farm and home life, caring for younger siblings, tending animals, weaving cloth, and preparing food. These skills were not simply domestic chores, but vital contributions to the survival of their kin and community. The household, or hus, was the center of female authority. Women managed the daily operations of the home with a deftness born from necessity. They controlled the storage of food, oversaw dairy production, spun wool into yarn, and wove textiles on looms that were often a fixture of rural homes. Such tasks required skill, patience, and a profound understanding of seasonal cycles. The quality of a farm's textiles, butter, and cheese was as much a reflection of a woman's labor as the success of the harvest was of the farmer's toil. Spiritual life also fell under the care of women. Before the full Christianization of Norway, women often maintained the vestiges of Norse pagan traditions alongside emerging Christian practices. Household shrines and rituals to honor ancestors, land spirits, and protective deities were typically tended by the women. Even as Christianity took firmer root, women continued to play essential roles in maintaining religious observance in their homes and communities, preparing for feast days, participating in communal prayers, and managing the moral fabric of their families. Legally, Norwegian women enjoyed a set of rights that stood out in medieval Europe. The medieval Norwegian legal code, such as the Gulathing law, granted women property rights unusual for the time. Women could inherit land and wealth, particularly if no male heirs existed, and widows often controlled estates independently. They could bring cases to court, represent themselves or their families, and were recognized as individuals under the law. This legal standing did not translate into political power, but it offered a measure of economic and social autonomy rare in the broader medieval context. Marriage was both a personal and strategic institution. Women typically married in their late teens or early 20s, often in arrangements orchestrated by families to strengthen alliances or secure resources. Yet marriage did not erase their authority entirely. While a husband generally held the title of head of household, a wife's counsel and management skills were crucial. In many cases, women acted as stewards of estates during their husbands' absences, whether due to war, trade, or pilgrimage, and their governance could be both effective and respected. Beyond the farmstead, some women stepped into roles that defied convention. Historical records and sagas hint at women who managed businesses, ran inns, or even took part in Viking expeditions as warriors or navigators, though these were exceptional cases. More commonly, widows became heads of households and sometimes landlords, exercising control over property and local economic affairs. In the fjord communities, where every person's contribution was vital, women's labor extended far beyond traditional domestic spheres. Childbirth and motherhood were central yet perilous aspects of women's lives. The risks were high, and the death of mothers and infants was tragically common. Midwives, often experienced women from the community, played a critical role, blending herbal knowledge with practical skill. The survival of both mother and child hinged on these women's expertise. Children were also raised within a tight-knit network of family and neighbors, with education focusing on practical skills, storytelling, and oral tradition. Women's daily existence was thus a complex balancing act between labor and family, tradition and change, authority and subservience. Their stories, often overshadowed in historical chronicles dominated by kings and warriors, are essential to understanding the social and cultural landscape of medieval Norway. They reveal a world where survival demanded collaboration and where women's contributions were both visible and indispensable. In quiet moments at the fireside, women passed down stories, songs, and wisdom, an oral heritage that preserved identity and shaped values. These narratives carried the echoes of ancient gods, heroic ancestors, and everyday struggles, binding generations in shared memory. Through these tales, women wielded a subtle but enduring power, shaping the cultural soul of their communities. To live as a woman in the high medieval kingdom of Norway was to embody resilience in the face of relentless natural and social challenges. It was to navigate a life where strength was expressed not only through physical labor, but through wisdom, management, and the unwavering commitment to family and faith. The women of the fjords were the silent pillars of their world, unyielding, resourceful, and essential. Childhood in the highlands, learning, play, and hardship. In the highlands and remote valleys of medieval Norway, childhood was a fragile yet formative passage, shaped by the rugged environment and the weight of communal expectations. Unlike the carefree notion of childhood we often imagine today, growing up in this world meant learning quickly that life demanded strength, endurance, and an unwavering commitment to family and faith. The days of a child were filled with chores, lessons, and moments of play, each one layered with the purpose of preparing them to inherit a harsh but vibrant world. From the moment a child's eyes opened to the dim light of their wooden longhouse, the rhythms of survival were already pressing. Boys and girls were expected to contribute early, with responsibilities tailored to gender and age, but always essential to the household's functioning. Toddlers might chase chickens in the yard or fetch water, while older children helped tend animals, gather firewood, or carry out simple farm tasks. There was little room for idleness. The fragile balance between people and nature demanded constant labor. Education was practical, informal, and deeply intertwined with spiritual formation. Formal schooling as we know it was rare outside monasteries or wealthy families, but the hearth was itself a classroom. Around the fire, parents and elders taught children Christian prayers and hymns, as well as the sagas and folk tales that had traveled down through generations. These stories were more than entertainment. They were lessons in morality, courage, and identity, anchoring young minds in the shared heritage of their people. The crackling flames illuminated the faces of wide-eyed children as they learned of ancient gods, legendary heroes, and the Christian saints who now held the place of honor. Play, though often limited by time and necessity, was vital. When the chores were done and the weather permitted, children engaged in games that sharpened their skills and forged social bonds. Boys might mimic warriors, wielding carved wooden swords and shields, imagining themselves as the brave defenders of their clans. Girls often played at domestic roles, weaving miniature cloth or caring for dolls made from scraps of cloth and wood. These moments of joy, laughter, and imagination offered a fleeting respite from the ever-present demands of survival. But childhood was shadowed by hardship. The unforgiving climate and isolation meant that illness, injury, and malnutrition were constant threats. Medical knowledge was rudimentary, and many children did not survive past their early years. Those who did grew resilient, shaped by the harsh lessons of nature and community life. Their bodies hardened by work, their minds steeped in tradition and faith, these children were being molded into the adults who would carry forward the legacy of their people. Gender roles became clearer as children aged. Boys were groomed to become farmers, fishermen, warriors, or tradesmen, depending on their family status and location. They learned to handle tools, navigate the terrain, and wield weapons. Girls were trained to manage the household, spin and weave cloth, and care for livestock and family members. Yet even within these roles, there was room for flexibility, especially in smaller communities where survival depended on shared effort. The church was a significant influence in childhood, particularly as Christianity deepened its hold on Norwegian society. Baptism was a critical rite marking the child's entry into the Christian community and conferring spiritual protection. Sunday services, attended by entire families, became central events where children learned discipline and the communal aspects of faith. The clergy sometimes took an active role in instructing children, teaching basic literacy and religious doctrine, although this was often limited to more privileged families. The village or farmstead was also a place of social learning. Children observed and absorbed the unspoken rules of behavior, the codes of hospitality, honor, and justice that governed daily life. Disobedience or failure to contribute could bring harsh discipline, but positive recognition came in the form of shared work, respect from elders, and inclusion in storytelling and communal rituals. Coming of age was a gradual but definitive process. For boys, this often meant participating in seasonal tasks that tested their endurance, fishing in stormy fjords, chopping wood through winter, or helping to defend the settlement. For girls, it involved mastering the complexities of household management and preparing for marriage, which often came in the late teens or early 20s. Both boys and girls were expected to learn the skills needed to thrive in a world where every action could mean survival or death. Despite the weight of responsibility, children's lives were not without tenderness. Family bonds were strong, and parents invested in the nurturing of their young. Storytelling at night, shared meals, and communal celebrations marked the cycles of the year, offering moments of joy and continuity. Festivals tied to the Christian calendar brought communities together, with children playing roles in church services or local pageantry. The harshness of life in the highlands fostered a deep sense of interdependence. Children grew up understanding that their well-being was linked to the community's strength. They learned to respect elders and peers alike, to share resources, and to face dangers together. This communal spirit was a cornerstone of survival in the often isolated and challenging Norwegian landscape. In this blend of toil, faith, learning, and play, the children of medieval Norway found their place in a world defined by nature's extremes and human endurance. They were shaped by the land, the stories of their ancestors, and the expectations of their families. To live and grow here was to become part of a chain stretching back through centuries, a lineage of strength and survival that would carry Norway through its high medieval golden age and beyond. The King's Court and Crusades, power and prestige. Step into the glittering yet perilous world of the Norwegian King's Court during the high medieval period, a place where power, ceremony, and diplomacy intertwined beneath the ever-watchful gaze of crown and country. The court was not merely a residence, it was the beating heart of the kingdom's political life, a stage for displays of authority, negotiation, and intrigue. Here, the monarchy sought to project prestige and unity across a rugged land marked by fjords, mountains, and fiercely independent local lords. The throne room itself was a spectacle, often held in stone castles or fortified royal residences that symbolized the crown's might. Rich tapestries, shining armor, and finely carved wooden furniture set the scene. Nobles and retainers dressed in their finest garments mingled in a carefully choreographed dance of loyalty and rivalry. Every gesture, from the bow to the exchange of gifts, was laden with meaning, a test of allegiance, respect, or subtle power plays. At the heart of this courtly world stood the king himself, a figure both exalted and embattled. Monarchs like Håkon Håkonsson embodied the kingdom's aspirations, uniting fractious regions, asserting royal law, and elevating Norway's standing among European powers. Their authority was simultaneously divine and practical, sanctioned by God, and enforced through alliances, military strength, and the loyalty of the Lendmen, the powerful noble class. Royal ceremonies reinforced this sacred and temporal authority. Coronations were grand affairs where the king was anointed with holy oil and publicly invested with the symbols of rulership, sword, crown, and scepter. These rituals bound the king to his subjects through vows and oaths, creating a bond of mutual obligation that extended beyond the battlefield. Festivals and feasts punctuated the year, blending religious devotion with displays of wealth and generosity, all designed to strengthen the monarchy's image and the kingdom's cohesion. Yet beneath this grandeur, court life was fraught with tension. Power struggles between nobles, disputes over land and titles, and the king's efforts to centralize authority all played out amid alliances and betrayals. The court was a hub of political maneuvering, where ambassadors from neighboring kingdoms and trading partners brought news, demands, and gifts. It was here that Norway positioned itself within the wider medieval world, balancing its Viking heritage with the realities of a Christian European order. One of the most profound expressions of Norway's engagement beyond its borders was its participation in the Crusades. Though the kingdom's geographical position was remote, Norwegian nobles and knights took part in these religiously sanctioned military campaigns aimed at reclaiming the Holy Land. Crusading was not only a matter of faith, but also a means of gaining prestige, wealth, and political leverage. Norwegian crusaders sailed from bustling ports like Bergen, equipped with ships crafted for long voyages across treacherous seas. Their journeys took them through the intricate networks of medieval Europe, linking Norway to the courts of France, England, and the Holy Roman Empire. The tales of these warriors, some who returned, others lost to the sands of distant lands, became part of the kingdom's collective memory, celebrated in sagas and church sermons alike. At home, the impact of crusading rippled through society. Nobles who returned brought back not only riches, but also new ideas about warfare, chivalry, and governance. The church endorsed crusading as a holy duty, strengthening its influence and integrating Norway more deeply into the European Christian community. However, the cost was high, both in lives and in the strains placed on local resources and families left behind. Diplomacy and court politics also extended beyond military endeavors. Marriages between royal houses forged alliances, secured peace treaties, and sometimes sparked conflicts. Envoys and messengers carried delicate negotiations, often conducted in Latin or Old Norse, with the aid of scribes and advisors skilled in law and rhetoric. The king's court was a microcosm of the kingdom's complex relationship with its neighbors, at once competitive and cooperative. Inside the palace walls, daily life combined the ceremonial with the mundane. The king's household included a retinue of advisors, clerics, soldiers, and servants who maintained the routines of governance and hospitality. Banquets featured lavish dishes, smoked fish, wild game, and imported spices, served alongside mead and ale, reflecting Norway's trade connections and the court's elevated status. Despite its splendor, the court was also a place of vigilance. The king had to guard against plots, rebellion, and external threats. Royal guards patrolled the halls, and secret councils deliberated on matters of security and succession. The delicate balance between power and stability demanded constant attention, as the fate of the kingdom often hinged on decisions made in these chambers. In this world of kings and crusaders, power was visible in every gesture and symbol, from the richly embroidered banners fluttering in the fjord's breeze to the solemn oaths sworn beneath vaulted ceilings. The Norwegian court of the high medieval era was a crucible where tradition met transformation, faith mingled with politics, and a kingdom forged its identity on the edge of Europe's northern frontier. To live and thrive here required not only courage and cunning, but an understanding of the complex web of loyalties and ambitions that shaped the realm. The court was a place where history was made daily, sometimes in triumph, sometimes in tragedy, and where the kingdom's future was crafted through ceremony, conflict, and the ever-shifting dance of power. Faith and fire, Christianity in the north, old gods and new beliefs. In the rugged and windswept landscapes of medieval Norway, faith was a battlefield as much as it was a source of comfort. The rise of Christianity in the north was not a gentle flowering, but a fierce, often turbulent transformation. It was a story of fire and fervor, of old gods retreating into shadow, and new beliefs taking root in cold soil, reshaping everything from laws to daily rituals, and forever altering the cultural landscape. Long before the first stone churches pierced the Norwegian skyline, the land was held under the watchful eyes of ancient Norse gods, Odin, Thor, Freya, and Loki, deities of war, wisdom, fertility, and chaos. Their presence was woven into every thread of daily life. People believed in their power to influence the weather, battles, and fate itself. The sagas and skaldic poetry immortalized their exploits, while rituals and sacrifices sought to appease and honor them, often in sacred groves or atop rocky promontories overlooking fjords and forests. But the arrival of Christianity, carried on the backs of missionaries, kings, and foreign influences, brought a new, often alien worldview. It was a religion rooted in a single, all-powerful God with a moral code and promise of eternal life that contrasted sharply with the cyclical, fate-driven Norse cosmology. This clash of beliefs was not merely spiritual, it was deeply political and social, a tool for kings to unify and exert control over their fragmented realms. The conversion of Norway was gradual and uneven, marked by moments of conflict and accommodation. Early Christian missionaries often faced suspicion or outright hostility. Tales survive of priests being chased from villages or forced to retreat to the relative safety of castles. Yet, with royal backing, most notably from King Olaf Tryggvason and later Olaf Haraldsson, Christianity gained ground, often by force as much as by persuasion. The destruction of pagan idols, the repurposing of sacred sites, and the establishment of churches were acts of both faith and dominion. Priests became pivotal figures in medieval Norwegian communities. More than spiritual guides, they were educators, scribes, and enforcers of Christian law. Monasteries, often remote and austere, served as centers of learning, manuscript preservation, and charity. These institutions connected Norway to the broader Christian world, facilitating cultural exchange with the rest of Europe. Yet the old beliefs did not vanish overnight. Deep-rooted traditions lingered in folk customs, festivals, and the collective memory. Many rural communities practiced a blend of Christianity and Norse ritual, a syncretism visible in seasonal celebrations and the lingering fear of trolls, elves, and other supernatural beings from old legends. This uneasy coexistence reflected a society in transition, caught between reverence for the past and acceptance of the new order. Christianity also profoundly influenced the law. The introduction of canon law and church courts meant that moral and social behavior was now judged against Christian norms. Issues like marriage, inheritance, and punishment for crimes were shaped by religious doctrine. The church's growing power sometimes clashed with traditional local customs and the authority of secular lords, creating a complex tapestry of governance. Daily life in medieval Norway began to revolve around the Christian calendar. Holy days, saints' feasts, and Lent dictated rhythms of work and worship. The sound of church bells became a constant reminder of faith's presence, calling the faithful to prayer and community gathering. For many, baptism, confession, and burial rites offered structure and hope in a world marked by hardship and uncertainty. Yet faith was also a source of fear. The promise of heaven came with the threat of damnation, and heresy was a grave concern. Clerics preached obedience to God and king alike, warning of sin and the devil's influence. The tension between old and new beliefs, between pagan memories and Christian doctrine, created a spiritual landscape charged with conflict and transformation. In this era of faith and fire, the Norse world was reborn, not erased but refashioned. Christianity became both a refuge and a weapon, shaping identities, communities, and the very laws that governed life in medieval Norway. To live here meant navigating this complex spiritual terrain, where every prayer was weighed against the shadows of ancient gods and the demands of a new divine order. Market day and maritime trade, the pulse of the coast. The coastline of medieval Norway was more than a scenic border between land and sea. It was the vibrant artery through which life pulsed, commerce, culture, and conflict flowing together in the briny air. Market days along the fjords and harbors were a spectacle of sights, sounds, and smells, where the rhythm of trade dictated the heartbeat of towns like Bergen, Oslo, and Trondheim. Here, the world beyond Norway's rugged shores met the raw natural resources of the north, creating a dynamic crossroads of medieval economy and society. Picture the dawn breaking over a bustling harbor, the wooden piers groan under the weight of goods being unloaded from sturdy clinker-built ships, their sails furled and flags fluttering in the brisk coastal wind. The salty tang of sea spray mingles with the pungent aroma of dried fish, stockfish, the cornerstone of Norway's export wealth. Salted and air-dried, these white cod hung in long rows, their preservation a marvel of technique passed down through generations, destined for distant markets from the Low Countries to the Mediterranean. Merchants from the Hanseatic League, those formidable German traders who wielded enormous economic power across northern Europe, have arrived in droves. They bring boats of colorful cloth, wool, linen, and fine silk, spices, salt, and luxury goods unknown to the average Norwegian peasant. Their voices, a mix of Middle-Low German and other tongues, weave into the clamor of local dialects, creating a multilingual hum that fills the air. The market stalls brim with goods from both land and sea. Furs of varying quality, marten, fox, and squirrel, are prized commodities, essential for the cold northern winters and coveted in warmer southern markets. These pelts tell tales of rugged trappers braving forests and snow, of wolves and bears lurking beyond the edges of civilization. Local farmers offer produce, hardy root vegetables, barley, and perhaps honey from forested hills. Artisans display handcrafted tools, iron nails, and carved wooden items, all essential for life in this harsh environment. The exchange is more than mere barter. It is a complex system of credit, negotiation, and trust, built on the fragile web of relationships between coastal villages and foreign traders. Money in the form of silver coins, often minted far from Norway's shores, circulates slowly but steadily, a symbol of the growing integration of the Norwegian economy into broader European networks. Beyond the material, Market Day is a social event. It's where news travels faster than ships, where alliances are forged and rivalries played out. Town criers announce royal edicts and church proclamations, while gossip spreads like wildfire. For many Norwegians, especially those from inland farms, the market is a rare opportunity to glimpse the wider world, to witness the power of the sea and trade firsthand. Maritime trade was the lifeblood of medieval Norway, sustained by the skills of sailors and shipbuilders who understood the treacherous North Atlantic waters. The iconic longships of the Viking Age evolved into larger, more stable vessels designed for cargo, reflecting changes in both technology and economic ambition. Navigating the fjords required local knowledge as well as bravery. The coastline is dotted with hidden reefs, narrow passages, and sudden storms that could turn a routine voyage into disaster. Control of these trade routes was a matter of power. The crown and local chieftains often competed for the right to tax goods, secure safe passage, and exert influence over coastal towns. The Hanseatic League's dominance in Bergen led to decades of tension, balancing cooperation with protectionism and occasional conflict. Yet, despite these challenges, the markets thrived. They were the engine driving Norway's gradual transition from a subsistence economy to one increasingly connected with European commerce and culture. Goods brought new ideas, technologies, and fashions. Merchants became intermediaries not only of goods, but of information and influence. In this world of salt, sail, and silver, Every trade carried risk and reward. Success could mean wealth and prestige, while failure might mean shipwreck or ruin. To live and survive in medieval Norway's coastal towns was to be part of this delicate dance of opportunity and danger, where the sea gave life and sometimes took it away. Market Day was not merely an economic event, it was the pulse of Norway's maritime identity, a vivid reminder that in this rugged land, survival depended on connection, courage, and the ceaseless flow of goods across the waves. Winter in the kingdom, survival and stories. The Norwegian winter arrives like a quiet, relentless shadow, stretching the daylight hours thin and casting the land into long, cold darkness. In this kingdom carved from fjords and mountains, winter is not merely a season. It is a trial of endurance, a test of community, and a time when survival demands every ounce of preparation and resilience. The cold seeps into bones, and the snow blankets the landscape, muffling sound and isolating settlements. Yet within the confines of wooden homes, hearth fires burn bright, and the warmth of human connection becomes as vital as the food stored away for the long months ahead. Outside, the world is a canvas of white, the snow piled high against walls and fences, the frozen fjords glinting beneath pale skies. Travel is treacherous, with narrow paths lost beneath ice and frost, forcing families to remain close to their homesteads. The work of summer and autumn, harvesting grain, preserving fish, cutting timber, must be completed before the frost settles. For once winter truly takes hold, the land demands rest as much as it demands endurance. Inside the farmhouse, the air is thick with the smell of burning pine and dried herbs hung from the beams. The hearth is the heart of the home, where flames dance and crackle, casting flickering shadows against rough wooden walls. Here, families gather, children tucked close to mothers, elders seated near the firelight, their faces weathered and wise. Winter nights stretch long, and time bends around the stories told by the flickering fire. Yule, the midwinter festival, breaks the monotony of cold and darkness. Rooted in both pagan traditions and Christian practice, Yule is a time of feasting, gift-giving, and ritual. The smell of roasted meats and spiced ale fills the air. Sprigs of evergreen and holly decorate homes, symbols of life enduring through the frost. Songs and dances echo in longhouses as communities come together to share warmth, laughter, and hope. These celebrations are more than mere festivity. They are a defiance of the encroaching cold, a collective affirmation that life will return with the spring. Stories are the lifeblood of these winter evenings. Tales of gods and heroes, of sea monsters lurking in fjords, and of ancestors whose strength shaped the land. Folk tales and sagas are passed down orally, weaving a tapestry of memory and identity that binds the present to the past. They teach lessons, inspire courage, and provide comfort in times of hardship. For children growing up amid these harsh conditions, these stories are both education and entertainment, a link to their heritage and a guide for survival. Yet winter is also a time of hardship. Food supplies dwindle despite careful preservation. Illness spreads easily in close quarters, and the cold can claim the weak and the elderly. The isolation can weigh heavily as news from distant friends and family becomes scarce. Farmers and fishermen, whose lives depend on the land and sea, must rely on skill and luck to endure the months when work is slow and the environment unforgiving. Community bonds deepen as neighbors share resources and labor. Snow travel, though difficult, is sometimes necessary to deliver aid or fetch supplies. Sleds drawn by sturdy horses or dogs become lifelines. In these moments, the harshness of winter reveals the profound interdependence required to survive. No one truly faces the cold alone. In this world, winter is not a pause but a crucible, shaping the character of individuals and communities alike. It is a season of endurance and reflection, of patience and preparation. The stories told by the fire are reminders of past struggles overcome and future challenges to face. To live through a Norwegian winter in the high medieval kingdom was to embrace the quiet power of resilience, to find warmth not just in flame, but in the shared human spirit that defies the darkness. The long nights demand courage, the cold demands strength, and the stories demand that the flame of culture and hope never flicker out. Song, sagas, and oral tradition. In a kingdom carved from craggy mountains and endless fjords, where the harsh climate and scattered settlements often isolated communities, the spoken word was more than mere entertainment. It was the lifeblood of memory, identity, and justice. Long before quills touched parchment, before ink stained vellum and flickering candlelight, Norway's history, laws, myths, and values were woven into the very fabric of daily life through song and saga. This was a world where the art of storytelling was sacred, a communal act that bound generations together through the oral thread. Imagine a dimly lit hall, the wooden walls soaked with smoke and warmth from the central hearth. The flickering firelight cast long shadows across faces, etched with hardship and wisdom. Gathered close, men and women listen intently as a skald, a master poet and singer, rises to recount tales that reach back into the mists of time. The skald's voice rises and falls, melodic and powerful, breathing life into ancient heroes, gods, and kings whose deeds shaped the world. Each story is a tapestry of memory, stitched with the threads of courage, tragedy, and the timeless struggle between order and chaos. The sagas were not simply fanciful myths. They were living histories, oral chronicles that preserved the lineage of families, the deeds of ancestors, and the codes of conduct that governed society. These tales carried the weight of law and morality, teaching listeners what was honored and what was condemned. The power of a well-told saga could sway hearts, settle disputes, and inspire warriors to face impossible odds. In this way, storytellers served as both entertainers and custodians of cultural heritage, their voices echoing across valleys and fjords, keeping the past alive in the hearts of the people. Each saga was crafted with poetic precision, employing complex meters and alliteration designed to aid memory and performance. This oral tradition demanded skill and dedication, a craft passed down from master to apprentice. The beauty of the language, the rhythm of the verses, and the vivid imagery transported listeners beyond the cold wooden walls, immersing them in worlds of gods and giants, of honor and betrayal, of love and vengeance. The sagas carried a profound sense of belonging, connecting isolated communities with a shared cultural narrative that transcended distance and time. Norwegian oral tradition also served as a repository for legal knowledge. Before laws were codified in manuscripts, the memory of rights, obligations, and punishments was preserved in public recitations and communal ceremonies. In a society where literacy was rare and written documents were precious, the spoken word was the most reliable vessel for justice. Local assemblies, or things, were arenas where elders and chieftains would recount precedents and decisions from memory, ensuring continuity and fairness in a world where law was deeply intertwined with custom. The transition from oral to written culture was gradual and transformative. As Christianity spread across the kingdom and monasteries began to flourish, scribes undertook the monumental task of capturing these rich traditions on parchment. This shift was not merely technological, but symbolic, turning ephemeral spoken tales into lasting records that could be preserved, copied, and studied. Manuscripts like the famed Heimskringla, penned by Snorri Sturluson, crystallized centuries of oral lore into literary masterpieces that remain cornerstones of Norse heritage. Yet, even as the ink dried on vellum, the spirit of oral tradition endured. The written sagas did not replace the spoken word, but complemented it, allowing stories to reach new audiences while preserving the evocative power of performance. In village halls, around fires, and at communal gatherings, the act of storytelling remained a vital social ritual, a means to teach, to entertain, and to remember. The voices of the skalds, the cadence of the verses, and the communal participation kept the past alive in a way that no manuscript alone could achieve. Through song and saga, the Norse people forged a resilient cultural identity amid the challenges of medieval life. The stories taught lessons of honor, courage, and respect for nature, shaping a worldview that balanced human endeavor with the forces beyond control. They reminded listeners that even in the face of hardship, the relentless winters, the uncertain seas, the threats of war and famine, there was strength in memory, in community, and in the enduring power of story. To walk through medieval Norway was to walk through a living storybook, where every valley, every fjord, and every village echoed with the voices of the past. The songs and sagas were the heartbeat of this kingdom, a timeless melody that carried the soul of a people who might not have survived the harsh realities of their world without the strength drawn from their shared heritage. In the end, the memory of a people not merely recorded in stone or ink, it lives in the stories told, passed from one generation to the next, ensuring that the spirit of the high medieval kingdom of Norway remains vivid, powerful, and unforgettable. The sea is life, mariners of the north. The sea was not merely a backdrop for life in medieval Norway. It was the very pulse that sustained and shaped the kingdom's existence. Stretching endlessly along jagged coastlines and deep fjords, the cold, restless waters of the North Atlantic were both a provider and a peril. To live by the sea was to embrace a life of constant negotiation with nature's fiercest moods, where every voyage was a test of skill, courage, and endurance. Mariners of the North, fishermen, traders, and explorers were the lifeblood of their communities, the ones who bridged isolated villages with the wider world beyond the waves. Imagine standing on the rocky shore at dawn, the briny air sharp and biting. The horizon blurs as a wooden longship, sleek and sturdy, cuts through the mist. Its curved prow adorned with carved serpent heads and intricate knotwork, the vessel is a marvel of medieval Norse craftsmanship. Boat building was an art passed through generations, timbers carefully chosen, shaped by hand, and joined with precision, often without nails, relying instead on iron rivets and expert lashings. The result was a ship both flexible and strong, capable of withstanding the pounding waves and sudden storms that could turn a day's work into a desperate fight for survival. For mariners, the sea was a world of rituals and reverence. Before setting sail, they sought blessings from both Christian saints and the lingering spirits of the old gods, sea gods like Aegir and Ran, believed to govern the waves and storms. Offerings were cast into the water, coins, carved symbols, or sometimes the first catch of the day, a plea for safe passage and bountiful harvests. These rituals reflected a deep understanding that the sea was unpredictable and dangerous, a force that demanded respect and humility. Fishermen faced the relentless cycle of seasons with fierce determination. In summer, they ventured into rich fishing grounds, hauling nets heavy with cod, herring, and salmon. The fish were vital, not only for local sustenance, but also as a cornerstone of Norway's export economy. Salted and dried on wooden racks, stockfish could be stored for long winters and traded far beyond the fjords. But fishing was grueling and perilous. The icy waters, sudden squalls, and treacherous currents made every trip a gamble with fate. Alongside fishing, coastal trade flourished. Norway's position on the edge of Europe made it a vital link in medieval trade routes. Merchants sailed from the farthest reaches of the Baltic and the Hanseatic League to exchange furs, timber, iron, and the ever-precious dried fish. Markets like Bergen thrived as bustling centers where foreign tongues mingled with the local dialects, and the air was thick with the scent of salt, tar, and foreign spices. The mariners were not just fishermen, but diplomats and entrepreneurs, weaving the fabric of the kingdom's economy and culture through their voyages. Life at sea demanded more than physical skill. It required an intimate knowledge of the environment and the celestial signs. Mariners read the patterns of waves, the flight of seabirds, and the subtle shifts in wind and cloud. The sun, moon, and stars were their guides during long, fog-bound voyages, with experienced navigators using primitive but effective methods to chart their course. Without modern instruments, their survival depended on the sharpest senses and the wisdom passed down through oral tradition. Yet even the most seasoned sailors could fall victim to the sea's fury. Storms could rise without warning, turning calm waters into roiling chaos. The sound of thunder crashing against cliffs, the spray of freezing waves crashing over decks, and the creaking of timbers under strain created a symphony of fear and determination. Mariners clung to their vessels, shouting orders and prayers, their lives balanced on the edge of disaster. Many did not return from these voyages, their fates swallowed by the relentless sea. Despite the dangers, the sea also offered a path to adventure and opportunity. Viking raids were fading by the high medieval period, replaced by more peaceful exploration and trade, but the spirit of boldness remained. Mariners charted new territories, connected distant lands, and carried news and ideas that shaped the kingdom's place in the medieval world. Their journeys were acts of courage and necessity, shaping not only their own destinies, but the fate of Norway itself. Back on land, the rhythm of maritime life dictated the community's pace. The arrival of ships meant news from afar, goods to be traded, and fish to be processed. Families depended on the success of these voyages, and celebrations often marked safe returns, while mournings remembered those lost to the sea. The coastline was dotted with lighthouses and watchtowers, reminders of both the sea's bounty and its peril. In every wooden vessel carved by skilled hands, in every ritual whispered before departure, and in every wave that crashed against the rugged shores, the story of medieval Norway's mariners was written. They were the kingdom's lifeline, its adventurers, its warriors of the waves, an elemental force in a world where survival meant mastering the merciless sea. To understand medieval Norway is to understand the sea, its power, its mystery, and the men and women who dared to live by its rhythm. Without their grit and resolve, the kingdom's isolated fjords would have remained silent, disconnected pockets in a harsh wilderness. Instead, they became vibrant centers of culture, commerce, and connection, carried forward on the backs of those who trusted the sea with their lives. War and honor, battles and bloodlines. In the rugged landscape of medieval Norway, the clash of steel was as constant as the crashing fjords and howling winds. War was not a distant concept or occasional calamity. It was woven into the very fabric of life. From fierce local feuds that could erupt over land, honor, or vengeance, to sprawling dynastic civil wars that shaped the kingdom's destiny, violence was both a brutal necessity and a stage for displays of courage and bloodline prestige. Imagine standing on a mist-shrouded hillside, the morning sun struggling through the cold air. Across the valley, a band of warriors assembles, men clad in chainmail, helmets glinting, and shields emblazoned with ancestral symbols. Their weapons gleam with deadly promise, long, double-edged swords forged in smoky forges, heavy axes designed to cleave bone and armor, and spears tipped with hardened iron, capable of piercing the thickest hide. These were the tools of survival in a land where disputes were often settled not in court, but on the battlefield. The culture of honor that permeated Norwegian warfare was fierce and unforgiving. A man's reputation was his currency, and the slightest insult or injury could spiral into bloodshed. Feuds between families and clans were common, sometimes lasting generations, with cycles of revenge that claimed countless lives. These conflicts were not only personal, but deeply political, intertwining with the ambitions of powerful nobles and rival kings. The civil wars that marked the high medieval period were particularly savage, tearing the kingdom apart with shifting alliances and brutal betrayals. At the heart of these struggles were bloodlines, claims to the throne often contested by cousins, uncles, and distant relatives who wielded armies to press their rights. Kings like Sverre Sigurdsson and Håkon Håkonsson fought not only for power, but for the very survival of their lineage and legacy. Their battles reshaped Norway's political landscape, forging a more centralized monarchy at the cost of countless lives. In the chaos of war, codes of conduct and honor emerged, sometimes rigid, often brutal. A warrior was expected to fight bravely, protect his kin, and never show cowardice. Capturing an enemy alive could mean ransom and wealth, but the battlefield was no place for mercy when survival was at stake. The violence was raw and merciless. Arrows rained down, shields splintered, and the clash of sword against shield rang out like thunder. The dead often lay where they fell, their blood soaking into the earth beneath Norway's untamed skies. Yet, war was not merely destruction. It was also spectacle and ritual. Before battle, warriors donned carefully maintained armor and adorned their weapons with symbols invoking divine favor. Christian crosses mingled with lingering Norse motifs. The clash of armies was sometimes preceded by challenges, speeches, and the raising of banners that rallied men to their cause. Songs of heroes and fallen warriors echoed in the halls and around campfires, preserving tales of valor and sacrifice. The price of power was steep. Noble families lost sons, brothers, and fathers in relentless campaigns. Peasant levies, farmers and fishermen conscripted into service, faced brutal training and even harsher realities on the field. For many, a day in medieval Norwegian warfare meant confronting the very limits of human endurance and facing death with grim resolve. Amid this violence, the king's role was both warlord and judge, expected to lead in battle and maintain order and peace. His authority was challenged constantly, requiring deft diplomacy and displays of military might. The crown sought to impose royal law over feuding nobles, attempting to replace cycles of personal vengeance with centralized justice. Yet the scars of past conflicts ran deep, and the path to unity was littered with the bodies of those who paid with their lives. To live in medieval Norway was to understand that honor and war were inseparable. The stories of battles won and lost, of bloodlines forged in fire, shaped the kingdom's identity. In this harsh, beautiful land, where the fjords cut deep and the mountains stood eternal, the sword was both protector and destroyer, a reminder that survival demanded courage, strength, and sometimes the ultimate sacrifice. Law on the land, the thing, justice, and community. The wind whips across the fjord, carrying with it the scent of pine, sea salt, and smoke from distant hearths. In a clearing surrounded by birch and spruce, the people are gathering, not for battle, not for feasting, but for something older, deeper. This is the thing, the cornerstone of governance in medieval Norway, where law is not something handed down from a palace, but debated, declared, and enforced in the open air by neighbors and kin. The thing is no fleeting counsel. It is the heartbeat of the community. You don't receive a summons carved in wax or signed by royal hand. The obligation to attend is understood. When you hear the call, whether by messenger, by signal horn, or the grapevine of the village, you prepare. Farmers leave their fields. Traders pause their travels. Even the elderly make the journey, hobbling with walking sticks, not wanting to miss the moment the law breathes anew. You arrive with your kin, walking or riding down mountain paths or across narrow waterways in boats carved from pine. The site is ancient, often marked by standing stones or earth mounds, a sacred grove or a flat plateau known to generations. The assembly ground is open to the sky, because justice in Norway is meant to be witnessed by all, transparent, communal, and sacred. At the center of this gathering is the law speaker, the lagman, a man of exceptional memory and trust. He does not read from scrolls. Instead, he recites the law, every clause, every precedent, by heart. His voice carries over the heads of the crowd, clear and measured, as he invokes centuries of oral tradition. This isn't merely performance. The law lives through speech, and the law speaker is its vessel. Around him stand the free men of the district, the bandi, or freeholding farmers, who together form the body politic. Their presence isn't ceremonial, it's essential. They vote, speak, challenge, and uphold. In Norway's high medieval society, power isn't purely top-down. Local justice has deep roots, and the thing remains a forum where consensus matters more than command. If you were to walk through this gathering, you'd find people of all stations, weathered farmers with dirt under their nails, lesser nobles in wool cloaks dyed with expensive madder, merchants with coin and grievance, and sometimes even royal envoys sent from distant courts to assert the crown's will. But none may raise their voice until the law speaker has finished his opening oration. Order is sacred here. Disputes come next, and they are as varied as the people themselves. A boundary between farms contested after a landslide erased old landmarks. A man accused of taking more timber than he was due. A theft of livestock. A failed betrothal. And sometimes more grave matters. An accusation of violence, blood spilled on a neighbor's soil, or worse, an unresolved killing. Witnesses speak, often nervously. Evidence is presented, though in this world, that often means personal testimony, oaths sworn on relics, or the memory of respected elders. If the case involves a death, the families of both accused and accuser are present. Their eyes meet not across a courtroom aisle, but in the shifting light of the northern sun, as the community listens. This isn't about one person's guilt, it's about restoring balance. Punishments are equally public. Fines are the most common, measured in silver, livestock, or labor, but they aren't just paid to the offended party. Compensation often supports the whole community, reinforcing the idea that a crime harms not just the victim, but the social fabric itself. In more severe cases, exile is declared. The condemned is told to leave within days, and when that happens, the silence of the crowd is often more chilling than the sentence itself. The law, you realize, is not cold here. It is living, breathing, recited by memory, enforced by neighbors, and rooted in tradition that is part Norse, part Christian, part survival. There are no guards in uniform, no gavel striking wood, only people who must live with each other long after the judgments are made. And that is perhaps why you wouldn't last a day here. Because in this world, justice is not hidden behind doors or filed away in dusty parchment. It is out in the open, where your shame, your errors, your name, good or bad, are spoken aloud. There is no anonymity, no bureaucracy to cushion you. If you cheat your neighbor, the whole valley knows. If you lie under oath, your children carry the shadow. If you are innocent, the crowd must believe it, not because a judge said so, but because the elders, the law, and the land itself stood in your defense. As the thing concludes, the crowd disperses in waves. Some linger, talking about the rulings, others preparing for a long journey home. Deals are struck in hushed tones, apologies murmured, and in rare cases, forgiveness offered. The law speaker wipes sweat from his brow, and the scribes, if any are present, may record the key moments for the growing number of clerks tied to the expanding royal administration. You look back once before leaving, and you see a boy watching the sight with wide eyes. He's too young to speak, but he is learning. One day, he may stand where his father stood. The law will live in him, not as a burden, but as a shared memory passed from tongue to ear for generations. This is the thing. Not a place, but a practice. A reminder that justice in Norway's medieval past was not a privilege of kings or courts, but a shared duty. And in that sacred space of speech and listening, the future of the kingdom took shape, one voice at a time. Healing and herbal lore, medicine between science and magic. In the thick silence between storm and sunrise, when frost clings to the eaves and the sick groan softly behind wooden walls, you don't call for a physician. There are no gleaming white robes or sterile instruments waiting behind polished doors. Instead, someone is already on their way, a healer, perhaps an old woman with hands like twigs and eyes sharp as crows. She carries not only herbs and cloth, but the memory of generations. For in medieval Norway, medicine lives in the mossy forest, in whispered charms, in boiling kettles, and the unseen lines between magic and healing. You wouldn't last a day here, because you expect a world of pills, of diagnoses backed by microscopes and digital charts. But in this time, illness is a mystery, an imbalance of the body, a curse from the gods, or a punishment from the Christian Lord. It could be caused by bad air, a guilty soul, or the wrong phase of the moon. And so healing in this harsh and sacred land must be both practical and poetic, earthbound and divine. Let's begin with the women, keepers of health in homes and hamlets. Midwives deliver children in low firelight, whispering protective verses over the heads of struggling mothers. Their knives are simple, their wisdom deep. They know which position might save a life, which herbs can hasten labor, and when to call upon the saints for intercession. But their names are spoken carefully. For the line between midwife and witch, healer and heretic is perilously thin. In mountain huts and coastal villages, herbalists prepare their tools. Iron pots, stone mortars, bundles of yarrow, juniper, angelica, and meadowsweet drying above their hearths. They gather with the seasons, chopping roots after the frost, plucking flowers at sunrise, speaking charms passed down by word and wind. Healing is tactile and slow, a poultice of pine resin and beeswax for wounds, birch bark tea for fever, dandelion for digestion, and when in doubt, goose grease. But not all is plant and prayer. There are bones to set, infections to drain, fevers to fight with snow-packed cloth and mustard rubs. Bloodletting still has its place, though viewed with suspicion in the north. Leech jars are rare. More common is the prick of a knife, the hum of an incantation, and a basin ready to catch what flows. Sickness must leave the body, and if it resists, the healer may reach for more spiritual tools. Runes are still carved even in this Christian age. Protection runes etched into birch bark, dipped in water, and drunk with hope. Tiny symbols hung over sickbeds, drawn into bread, burned into ash. Not sorcery, not quite, just tradition. Echoes of a time when Odin knew 9 spells and words had weight. In towns near monasteries, another path emerges, one lit by scripture and ink. Monks, trained in copying texts from the wider Christian world, begin to dabble in the practices of Salerno and Avicenna. The educated elite learn of humors, black bile, yellow bile, phlegm, and blood. Illness becomes imbalance. Treatments become prescriptive. Hot versus cold, wet versus dry. Leeches return, and with them, doses of vinegar, rose oil, and powdered pearl, if you can afford them. But the common folk rarely reach these halls of Latin and logic. They trust the woman with the herbal bundle, the neighbor who knows how to bind a broken limb, the man who sings charms when cows fall ill. For even animals must be healed, especially in a land where survival depends on goats and sheep, on milk and hides. And the healers? They walk a careful path, loved for their cures, feared for their power. When their remedies work, they're praised. When they fail, when a child dies or a sickness spreads, they may be blamed, accused of inviting disease instead of dispelling it, of consorting with dark forces. The church tolerates them when they speak of saints, but watches closely when they chant in Old Norse or use herbs tied to pagan rites. There is compassion in these healers, but also exhaustion. They work until their hands tremble. They bear witness to death more often than life. They must comfort the dying with honeyed water and cradle the stillborn with tears that no prayer can banish. And still, the people come. Healing in medieval Norway is not a profession. It is a calling, a burden, a birthright passed from mother to daughter, from wise man to apprentice. There are no licenses, no degrees, only reputation and memory. The Black Death comes north, plague and devastation. The warning doesn't arrive with banners or proclamations. It comes in fragments, stories spoken in hushed tones beside the hearth, whispers brought by traveling merchants, murmurs that cling to the hems of cloaks soaked with southern rain. A strange sickness, they say, is spreading. It takes the strong and the weak alike, the pious and the wicked. There is no pattern to it, no mercy. Few believe the tales at first. Norway feels remote, protected by its mountains and seas, by the long arms of fjords and the thick forest walls that keep the world at bay. But distance offers no immunity, not from what is coming. When it does arrive, it does so quietly. A trading vessel slips into harbor with little fanfare, its hull laden with cloth, grain, barrels of dried cod and salted meat. No one notices that the crew is thinner than expected, that the air smells strange, thick with something other than brine and timber. Men come ashore. Some stumble, some cough, some don't speak at all. And within days, the illness begins to bloom like mold in the corners of the village. First a fever, then dark swellings under the arms and groin, pain like fire, and death, fast and unrelenting. The elders say they've never seen anything like it. The healers murmur over their herbs, their eyes wide with dread. You wouldn't last a day in this kind of fear, the kind that has no shape, no enemy to hold back with sword or prayer, the kind that clings to every breath, every cough heard in the night, the kind that empties churches, turns neighbors against one another, and silences entire families before the next sunrise. The priests preach repentance, fasting, penance. The old women grind mountain herbs and recite charms handed down from grandmothers long gone. But none of it matters. The sickness moves like smoke through cracks in the wall, slipping through shutters, seeping into straw bedding, stealing away the strong in their sleep. There are not enough hands to dig graves. The bell that tolls the dead rings until the ringer himself is gone. In some places, the living abandon the bodies to the forest, hoping the snow or the wolves will do what no one dares. Fires are lit in the streets in futile hopes of purging the air. Doors are marked with ash. Children cry not from hunger, but from loneliness, as entire households fall silent. The rhythm of life, sowing, harvesting, baking, gathering, disintegrates into chaos. The fields grow wild, the livestock wander, the wells sit untouched as if the very water has turned traitor. And it does not end quickly. The plague comes in waves. There are brief, fragile lulls when hope returns, when villagers clean the chapel and sweep the market square and tell themselves it has passed. But it hasn't. It comes back stronger, hungrier. It always comes back. The second time, no one celebrates the quiet. They wait for the return, bracing for it like sailors watching the sky shift before a storm. The wind carries more than snow now. It carries dread. You may think this is only a tragedy of bodies, but that is only the beginning. What breaks people is not death itself, but the loss of meaning. What is law when the jurist lies unburied? What is faith when even the priest dies with no sacrament? What is family when the hearth that once held warmth is blackened and cold? The ties that held this kingdom together, kinship, believer, begin to unravel. Nobles retreat to distant manors. Monks seal the monastery gates. The poor huddle in what homes remain, waiting not for salvation, but for the end. And still amid the ruin, there are flickers of resilience. A widow takes in the orphan of her neighbors. A young boy carries grain through a storm to a mother too weak to stand. There are moments, small and visible to the world, when love persists despite everything. But love does not stop the sickness. Nothing does. You wouldn't last, not because you lack strength, but because you lack familiarity with hopelessness, drawn out over months, then years. In the north, where winters are already long and nights already quiet, the plague makes the silence eternal. The familiar joy of Yule grows hollow. The great feasts are gone. Songs are fewer. Even the birds seem quieter. Those who survive are changed. Not just older, not just sadder, changed. A generation grows up with no siblings, no teachers, no memories of what the kingdom once was. The ancient traditions are tested. Roles shift. A farmer's daughter now manages the land. A boy who once hoped for the priesthood now becomes the village's only healer. A new kind of society takes shape, not out of choice but necessity. Even the church, once the pillar of certainty, strains under the weight of unanswered prayers. Faith does not die, but it fractures. For some, belief becomes more fervent, more desperate. For others, it fades into silence. In the absence of clerics, old rituals resurface. Runes are carved again, charms hung above doorways. The veil between the old gods and the new feels thinner than ever. The great cities shrink. The monasteries grow overgrown with ivy and moss. Ports that once welcomed traders now sit ghostly in the fog. A kingdom that once looked outward now turns inward, wounded and wary. The people remember. Even generations later, they speak of it in half whispers, of the sickness that needed no sword, no flame, no army to conquer a land. You wouldn't last a day because you wouldn't understand what it means to bury your own past with your loved ones. You wouldn't understand what it means to see your village, once alive with laughter and music, reduced to echoes. You wouldn't understand how long recovery takes, not just to rebuild a roof, but to trust again, to hope again, to sing. And yet, from the ashes, something slowly stirs. Life, ever stubborn, pushes through the cracks. A child is born, a song is taught. A new chapel is raised beside the ruins of the old. The kingdom does not return to what it was. It never will. But it moves forward, reshaped by grief, guided by memory. A quieter place, a humbler people, but enduring. This was the end of the Golden Age. Not with a war, not with a throne seized or a church burned, but with silence, with empty chairs, with paths grown over and names forgotten. The Black Death came north, and nothing, not even the long, hard winters, ever changed the land so completely. The Craftsman's Workshop. Artisans of wood and iron. Step through the heavy wooden doors of a medieval craftsman's workshop, and you enter a world alive with the sounds and smells of creation, where raw timber and glowing iron are transformed by hands both skilled and patient. The air carries the sharp scent of burning coal from the forge, mingled with the resinous aroma of freshly cut pine and spruce. Here, the rhythmic pounding of hammer on anvil echoes through the space, punctuated by the occasional hiss of steam as water meets hot metal. This is the heart of the kingdom's material culture, where the very tools that shape daily life are painstakingly forged and crafted. The workshop itself is a modest building, often a timber-frame structure with walls made from rough-hewn planks, windows shuttered against the cold Norwegian wind. Inside, benches carved with grooves and stains tell stories of years, even decades of work. Shavings of wood curl like fragile parchment beneath the steady hand of the carpenter, while sparks fly from the blacksmith's anvil in an almost hypnotic pattern. Apprentices, youths bound by oath and eager to prove their worth, watch and learn under the sharp eyes of masters, absorbing knowledge that cannot be written in any book but must be felt and experienced. The relationship between master and apprentice is sacred, a blend of discipline and mentorship that will carry the tradition forward. The blacksmith's role is vital in this society, shaped by harsh landscapes and constant need for durable tools. With bellows pumping air into the roaring fire, iron is heated until it glows red hot, pliable as clay, but charged with the promise of strength. Every strike of the hammer on the glowing metal is deliberate, a dance of controlled power and precision. The blacksmith fashions weapons that defend communities: axes, swords, spearheads, as well as indispensable farming implements, nails, and horseshoes that allow life to go on through changing seasons. Each item must be perfectly balanced. A poorly forged blade or a weak plowshare could spell disaster in a time when survival depends on tools functioning without fail. The smith's work shapes both peace and war, prosperity and survival. In the neighboring corner, the carpenter wields a plane and chisel with equal mastery, coaxing life from the stiff grain of local wood. Norway's dense forests provide an abundance of material, but transforming this raw resource into usable objects requires skill. Carpenters craft everything from sturdy longhouse beams to delicate ecclesiastical carvings that adorn the majestic stave churches, a testament to both craftsmanship and faith. The geometric patterns and entwined animal motifs carved into timber panels reveal a deep connection to ancestral symbolism, merging pagan artistry with Christian iconography in a way unique to the Norwegian soul. The process of shaping wood is painstaking, requiring not only technical skill, but an intimate understanding of the grain's direction and strength. Guilds and craft associations regulate these trades, acting as both protectors of knowledge and gatekeepers of quality. Membership in a guild is a coveted privilege, granting access to workshops, markets, and the chance to take on apprentices of one's own. These organizations ensure that skills are passed down faithfully, maintaining standards that support the economy and the community's well-being. Apprenticeships can last years, with young hands beginning by sweeping floors and preparing materials before moving on to more complex tasks. Journeymen travel from workshop to workshop, honing their abilities and seeking the chance to create a masterpiece piece, a requirement before becoming a master. This structure fosters both competition and camaraderie, binding craftsmen in a shared mission to sustain their livelihoods and the kingdom's infrastructure. The artifacts created in these workshops extend far beyond their practical use. They carry cultural significance that speaks to the identity of a people living on the edge of wilderness and civilization. A finely crafted axe is not just a tool for chopping wood or wielding in battle. It is a symbol of status, a token of a man's place within the community. Similarly, a wooden chest carved with intricate designs might hold treasured possessions or sacred relics, blending artistry with everyday function. The craftsman's hands thus connect the physical with the spiritual, creating objects that resonate with meaning and memory. The monks and the manuscripts, keepers of knowledge. Step silently into the cloistered world of the medieval monastery, where the light filters softly through narrow windows, casting muted patterns across cold stone walls and wooden desks. Here, far from the bustling market towns and storm-swept fjords, the rhythm of life is marked by prayer, study, and the steady scratch of quill on parchment. This is the realm of the monks, devout men dedicated not only to God, but to the preservation of knowledge in a time when books were rare treasures, painstakingly created by hand. In these sacred scriptoria, the art of manuscript illumination flourishes. Monks gather in orderly rows, each seated at a slanted desk, their focus unwavering. By candlelight or the pale daylight that seeps through the small openings, they carefully copy texts in Latin, Old Norse, or occasionally in other languages, carried through European ecclesiastical networks. Every letter is crafted with reverence, a slow and meditative process that transforms raw animal skin's vellum into vessels of history, law, theology, and poetry. The manuscripts themselves are more than mere documents. They are lifelines to a past and bridges to a future. Through them, stories of kings and saints, laws and legends, prayers and prophecies are preserved against the eroding forces of time. The monks serve as guardians of this heritage, often working in near silence, mindful of the sacred duty entrusted to them. Their work links the remote Norwegian kingdom to the wider intellectual currents of medieval Europe, as texts travel across mountain passes and stormy seas, carrying ideas that shape faith, governance, and culture. Monastic scriptoria are centers of learning and literacy in a society where few possess the skill to read or write. The majority of Norwegians live by oral tradition, their histories and laws passed down through song and storytelling. Yet within the monastery walls, the written word holds immense power, an instrument to maintain order and connect with the divine. Monks learn not only to transcribe, but also to understand and interpret these texts, becoming scholars, theologians, and scribes who counsel rulers and clergy alike. The painstaking creation of a manuscript involves multiple stages: preparation of the parchment, grinding of pigments from minerals and plants for vivid illumination, and binding of the finished pages into covers of wood and leather. Some manuscripts are lavishly decorated, with intricate knotwork and vivid depictions of biblical scenes and Norse motifs intertwined, reflecting the unique cultural synthesis of the region. These illuminated manuscripts are masterpieces of devotion and artistry, designed to inspire both awe and piety in their readers. Yet the monastery is not only a workshop for books, it is a sanctuary of contemplation and prayer. The monks' daily lives follow the canonical hours, a cycle of services from early morning matins to evening compline, interwoven with labor and study. This disciplined routine cultivates a spiritual atmosphere where knowledge and faith are inseparable. Their intellectual labor is itself an act of worship, an offering to God through the pursuit of truth and preservation of wisdom. The monastery's library, though modest by modern standards, is a treasure trove in its time. Scrolls and codices are carefully stored and guarded, accessible only to the learned few. Here, ancient Roman, Christian, and Norse texts mingle, reflecting the complex layers of identity in medieval Norway. Monks painstakingly translate and copy not only religious texts, but also medical treatises, legal codes, and chronicles, ensuring the survival of diverse knowledge that might otherwise vanish in a harsh and uncertain world. Monks also play a key role in education beyond the cloister. They teach young nobles and clerics to read, write, and understand Latin, the language of church and diplomacy. This education shapes future leaders, linking the kingdom to the wider Christian world and enabling participation in continental affairs. Through their scholarship, monks influence the cultural and political trajectory of Norway, even as they live removed from its tumultuous courts and battlefields. However, this scholarly world is not without its tensions. The gradual Christianization of Norway means that monastic scribes often stand at the crossroads of old and new beliefs. While they preserve the sacred texts of Christianity, echoes of ancient Norse myths persist in oral tradition and occasionally surface in manuscript marginalia, small drawings or notes revealing a lingering reverence for ancestral gods and legends. The monks' mission is to root out heresy and pagan practices while navigating the cultural realities of their time, a delicate balancing act between faith and tradition. The manuscript itself is a symbol of permanence amid the impermanence of medieval life. In an era marked by war, famine, and plague, these handwritten tomes offer a measure of stability, a record that survives long after the flicker of human lives. The monks' quiet dedication ensures that Norway's history, laws, and faith endure, passed down to generations yet unborn, a testament to resilience in a world forever in flux. As you leave the scriptorium, the faint scent of ink and vellum lingers, a reminder of the unseen labor behind every written word that shaped the medieval kingdom. The monks, cloaked in simple habits, continue their vigil, silent keepers of knowledge, their hands steady as they forge connections across time, safeguarding the fragile threads of culture, faith, and identity that define a people. Storms, shipwrecks, and sea spirits, legends of the deep. The sea was both a giver and a taker of life in medieval Norway, a vast and merciless expanse that shaped the destinies of those who dared to sail its cold, dark waters. For the hardy Norsemen and women of the fjords, the ocean was more than a route for trade or conquest. It was a wild, unpredictable force that demanded respect, fear, and a deeply held belief in the unseen spirits that governed its moods. To venture out onto these northern waves was to step into a world alive with dangers, both natural and supernatural, where storms could appear without warning, ships could be torn apart by savage winds, and eerie omens whispered of doom. In a land where fjords cut deeply into the rugged coastline, the sea was never far away, and nearly every household had ties to fishing, trading, or raiding. Yet the sailors and fishermen who risked these voyages understood that the ocean was a realm ruled by ancient, inscrutable powers. Their lives were tethered to a fragile balance between human skill and divine favor, a balance that could be shattered by a single misstep or a slight offense to the spirits beneath the waves. Storms were the most feared manifestation of the sea's wrath. Unlike today's weather forecasts, medieval Norwegians relied on keen observation, oral lore, and spiritual intuition to anticipate tempests. When the sky darkened and the wind howled like a pack of wolves, sailors knew the sea was turning violent. Waves could rise like towering mountains, crashing over decks and snapping the stoutest masts as if they were twigs. The thunder of the ocean's fury was deafening, and ships often found themselves at the mercy of a watery grave. One of the most chilling tales passed down through generations is that of the Skjoldmøy, the Shield Maiden ship, a vessel said to have vanished in a monstrous storm off the coast of Trøndelag. According to the sagas, as the tempest gathered strength, strange lights flickered on the water's surface and ghostly figures appeared on the waves. These were believed to be the Havfru, the sea spirits or mermaids, who lured sailors to their doom with haunting songs and deceptive beauty. Those who glimpsed these ethereal beings were said to be cursed, doomed never to reach safe harbor again. The sea spirits were not merely malevolent tricksters, but complex entities entwined with the natural world and the Norse spiritual landscape. Some were protectors of sailors, demanding respect and offerings to ensure safe passage. Fishermen would leave gifts of bread, fish, or ale on the shore or the prow of their boats, hoping to appease these unseen guardians. Failing to honor them could provoke violent storms, loss of catch, or worse, the dreaded Naki, water spirits that drag the unwary beneath the waves to drown. Shipwrecks were common and devastating, not just for the loss of life, but for the economic ruin they could bring to isolated coastal communities. When a vessel was lost, it was often a mystery whether it had succumbed to natural forces or supernatural wrath. Survivors sometimes spoke of strange occurrences, flickering lights in the fog, unnatural silence before the storm, or spectral voices calling from the depths. These accounts blurred the line between reality and myth, reinforcing the eerie power the sea held over human fate. The psychological weight of these legends shaped every aspect of maritime life. Sailors carried talismans, carved runes, animal bones, or iron charms believed to ward off evil. Rituals were performed before departure, prayers to Odin for wisdom and strength, invocations to Njord, the god of the sea, for calm waters and bountiful catches. Even the timing of voyages was influenced by superstition. Certain days were deemed unlucky, and moon phases were carefully noted to avoid sailing into peril. Yet, despite the perils and the pervasive fear, the sea remained a vital lifeline for medieval Norwegians. It connected scattered settlements, enabled trade with distant lands, and offered opportunities for glory and wealth through raiding. To live by the sea was to accept its dual nature, a source of both life and death, mystery and revelation. In the end, the stories of storms, shipwrecks, and sea spirits are more than just ghostly tales. They are the echoes of a people who faced an unforgiving world with courage, faith, and a deep connection to forces beyond human control. For those unprepared for the harsh realities of the high medieval Norwegian coast, the sea would prove an unbeatable adversary, its legends a grim reminder that survival required more than strength. It demanded respect for the ancient powers that ruled the deep. The royal church-state struggle, power, and piety. In the high medieval kingdom of Norway, the throne and the altar were locked in a delicate, often violent struggle for supremacy. Kings and archbishops wielded their power like sharpened swords, each determined to dominate the realm's soul and its sword arm. The story of Norway's medieval church-state conflict is a tale of ambition, faith, and ruthless political intrigue, one that shaped the very fabric of the kingdom and left no room for the faint-hearted. The medieval Norwegian king was not merely a warrior or ruler. He was seen as the earthly representative of divine authority, charged with maintaining order and justice. Yet, the rise of Christianity had introduced a new and formidable power: the church, led by archbishops who claimed to act in God's name. This spiritual authority often challenged royal prerogative, insisting that canon law and papal decrees held supremacy over secular kingship. The clash was inevitable, and it was brutal. Norway's church was unique in its organization and power. By the 12th century, the Archbishopric of Nidaros, modern-day Trondheim, had become a center of ecclesiastical authority stretching over Norway and parts of the surrounding Nordic territories. The archbishop was more than a religious leader. He was a political heavyweight with lands, wealth, and the loyalty of powerful bishops and abbots. His influence reached deep into every corner of the kingdom, often rivaling that of the king. Kings, on the other hand, relied heavily on a complex network of nobles, warriors, and local chieftains to secure their rule. but their power was precarious, constantly threatened by internal factions and external enemies. The church's growing claim to influence over law, taxation, and appointments of officials struck at the heart of royal authority. The king's desire to maintain control over his realm clashed with the church's ambition to govern spiritual and temporal matters alike. One of the most tense flashpoints in this struggle was the conflict over investiture, the right to appoint bishops and abbots. For the king, control over these appointments meant loyalty and influence. For the church, it was about maintaining independence from secular rulers and preserving spiritual purity. Disputes over these appointments frequently escalated into open conflict, with excommunications, armed standoffs, and even assassination plots becoming part of the political landscape. The struggle intensified under kings like Sverre Sigurdsson, whose reign in the late 12th century was marked by fierce battles against both rebellious nobles and the church's representatives. Sverre challenged the authority of the archbishop, refusing to accept excommunication and demanding obedience from clergy within his domain. His defiance led to a bitter civil war known as the Church Struggle, tearing the kingdom apart and forcing many into exile or death. The king's vision of a strong, centralized monarchy came at a high price, near constant unrest and division. On the church's side, the archbishops wielded the power of excommunication, a terrifying spiritual weapon that could isolate a king from his subjects and undermine his legitimacy. To be cut off from the church was to be branded an enemy of God, a pariah in both the earthly and heavenly realms. This spiritual sanction was not merely symbolic. It could provoke rebellion among nobles who sought to align themselves with the church against an excommunicated monarch. Behind the scenes, alliances shifted like quicksand. Nobles, bishops, and foreign powers maneuvered for advantage, weaving a web of intrigue where loyalty was bought and sold, and betrayals were commonplace. The papacy itself played a critical role, often supporting archbishops who resisted royal interference, sending legates to enforce canon law and reminding kings of their spiritual duties. Yet, despite the seemingly endless conflict, the church-state struggle also laid the groundwork for the kingdom's future. It forced Norwegian rulers to refine their authority, codify laws, and negotiate the delicate balance between sacred and secular powers. Over time, compromises emerged, though never without tension, that shaped the identity of Norway as a kingdom where king and church coexisted in uneasy partnership. For the ordinary people caught in this power struggle, life was a precarious tightrope walk. Loyalty to king or church could mean safety or ruin, favor or persecution. The clash of laws created confusion. Was royal decree or church edict supreme? Taxes and tithes drained pockets, while local disputes could escalate when fueled by competing authorities. Peasants and townsfolk had little say, forced to navigate the dangerous currents of power that shaped their lives from the throne room to the village chapel. To survive in medieval Norway's royal church-state struggle demanded more than just faith or swordsmanship. It required shrewd political instinct, unwavering loyalty, and often ruthless pragmatism. Those unprepared for the complex dance of power and piety risked exile, imprisonment, or death, forgotten in the ruthless pages of history where kings and archbishops wrote their legacy in blood and prayer. The last pagan echoes, spirits in the shadows. In the high medieval kingdom of Norway, the air was thick not only with the scent of pine and cold fjord winds, but with whispers of ancient spirits and gods that refused to fade into history. Though Christianity had become the official faith, the old ways of trolls lurking in shadowed forests, hulking hill spirits guarding rocky crags, and gods once worshipped in sacred groves persisted in the collective memory and hearts of the people. This was a realm where faith and folklore intertwined like tangled roots beneath the earth, and where surviving the twilight between worlds demanded more than simple belief. The conversion of Norway to Christianity was a gradual, often violent process spanning centuries. Missionaries and kings imposed the new religion, building stone churches and outlawing old rites. Yet, for many Norwegians, farmers, fishermen, and travelers, the ancient spirits remained alive in stories, rituals, and hidden corners of the land. In a world where nature was both provider and threat, the line between the sacred and the supernatural blurred, creating a landscape haunted by unseen eyes and unspoken fears. Trolls, those enormous, often grotesque creatures of legend, were believed to dwell in caves and mountains, far from the flickering glow of human settlements. Stories told of their monstrous strength and malice, but also of their deep connection to the Earth's ancient magic. It was said that trolls hated the light of day and the ring of church bells, retreating into the shadows when either was near. Yet at twilight, when the veil between worlds was thin, they stirred, watching the world of men with cruel amusement or deadly intent. Hill spirits, known as Huldrafolk or Skjegfolk, were more subtle but no less feared. These elusive beings were said to inhabit hills, forests, and even abandoned farms, guarding the land's secrets and punishing those who disrespected nature's delicate balance. Tales warned of travelers lost in fog, lured by enchanting songs or strange lights, never to return. Farmers left offerings of food and drink by stones and trees, hoping to appease these spirits and secure a good harvest or protect their livestock from disease. Even the ancient gods, Odin, Thor, Freya, cast long shadows in the medieval imagination. Though the temples had crumbled and sacrifices ceased, their names still echoed in folk charms, secret incantations, and hidden amulets. Some believed these gods had retreated to the realms beyond, watching quietly as the new Christian god's light spread across the land. Others whispered that the old gods awaited a time when men would call upon them again, when the world's balance tipped too far into the new faith's cold order. This blending of Christian and pagan belief created a complex spiritual landscape where the clergy often condemned old customs as devil worship, while villagers clung to them as essential safeguards against the unknown. A mother might bless her child with a Christian prayer while hiding a small rune-carved talisman beneath the infant's swaddling cloth, a charm against sickness or evil spirits. Weddings and funerals might be marked by church rites, but also by the lighting of sacred fires or offerings to the land spirits. The church struggled to stamp out these superstitions, sometimes with brutal campaigns of persecution. Those accused of witchcraft or sorcery faced exile, imprisonment, or death. But the endurance of these old beliefs was a testament to their deep roots in the human need to make sense of a wild and unpredictable world. In the endless winters and long nights of Norway's rugged landscape, the shadows held both terror and comfort. For travelers and sailors navigating the fjords and open seas, tales of sea spirits and ghosts mingled with fears of storms and shipwrecks. The Draugr, undead beings risen from watery graves, were said to haunt the shores, pulling the unwary beneath the waves. Fishermen carried charms to ward off such curses, and prayers to both Christian saints and old sea gods filled the air before each voyage. To survive the harsh elements and the unseen threats lurking beneath the surface demanded reverence for all powers, old and new. In the quiet villages and wild forests of medieval Norway, the past was never truly gone. The echoes of pagan gods, spirits, and ancient magic lingered like a hidden current beneath the surface of daily life. To live there was to walk a line between worlds, where faith was not a single path, but a tapestry woven from light and shadow, prayer and superstition. For the outsider unprepared for this haunting duality, the kingdom's spiritual landscape was as dangerous as any sword. Misstep or disrespect could bring the wrath of both earthly and otherworldly powers, and survival meant understanding the delicate balance between the old god's lingering shadows and the rising light of a new faith. In medieval Norway, belief was not just a matter of salvation, it was a matter of life or death.